Assange isn't even really a whistleblower. He's a journalist. The whistleblowers are the ones who are sending him documentation because they were too afraid of our own government to actually blow the whistle. That's why Seth Rich in D.C. got 2 in the back in a mugging when they didn't even take his wallet.
Exactly. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to Constitutional Corner, the Whistleblower Act of 1989.
Blow my whistle, baby. Let's go.
Yes, sir. All right, so most of you already have an idea of what a whistleblower is, but though, like, what does that entail, and why was it created? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna break down this act and give you some examples of how it was used and some of the more controversial events surrounding it on this week's edition of Constitutional Corner. Now, of course, number one, what is the Whistleblower Act of 1989? The Whistleblower Protection Act was enacted to strengthen and improve protections for federal employees who expose wrongdoing with the government agencies. Before this law, whistleblowers often faced retaliation, including job loss, demotion, or any other punitive actions. The WPA aims to ensure that federal employees can report misconduct without fear or reprisal, thus promoting transparency and accountability in the government. So a little bit of a historical context here. They need stronger whistleblower protections because evident through various high-profile cases where whistleblowers face severe consequences for their actions. The Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 provided some protections, but these were deemed insufficient. Consequently, the WPA was introduced to address these shortcomings and offer more robust safeguards for whistleblowers. All right, so a couple of key provisions that we've got here. The Whistleblower Protection Act includes several critical provisions: protection against retaliation, Office of Special Counsel. The act established an OSC, an independent federal agency responsible for investigating whistleblower complaints and ensuring that corrective actions are taken when retaliation is found. Then they have a Merit System Protection Board, or MSPB. The MSPB provides a legal avenue for whistleblowers to appeal retaliation claims and seek readdress. Then you have covered disclosures. The Act defines the types of disclosures that are protected, including violation of laws, gross mismanagement, gross waste of funds, abuse of authority, and substantial and specific danger to public health or safety. And then burden of proof in retaliation cases. The burden of proof is on the agency to demonstrate that the same personnel action would have been taken even in the absence of whistleblowers' disclosure. All right. Impact and effectiveness. Since its enactment, the WPA has played a significant role in encouraging whistleblowing within the federal government. It has led to numerous disclosures of misconduct and have been instrumental in promoting transparency. However, challenges remain, including implementation issues. Despite the protection, some whistleblowers still face retaliation, and the effectiveness on the OSC and MSPB have been questioned in some cases. Legal loopholes. Certain legal and procedural loopholes have been sometimes undermined in the Act's protections, prompting calls for further reforms. This is probably for like NDAs and things like that, because once you get NDAs in, it gets really... It's a lot more difficult to get information out.
NDAs, but the thing about NDAs and really any contractual agreement is they're null and void if there's some kind of criminal activity that's provable. You can't. This is. It gets a little muddier too with arbitration clauses and whatnot when you want to file lawsuits against, say, I think Verizon had some arbitration stuff with their insurance. If you did their Assurion insurance, there was issues with that. I think Sony even had some arbitration things with end user. A lot of times arbitration is stuffed into end user license agreements too.
Right.
So that gets even muddier, and unions have arbitration a lot of the time. So which means arbitration means whoever it is that you have this agreement with, you have to use their third party service that does the whole,
like an arbitration of some sort.
yeah, they, well,
Mhm.
I'm
Ish.
trying not to use the word in the definition, like you go to court, a judge is going to make a decision on a thing. You get to hear it out with an actual independent third party that's a part of, either an elected, judge or a civil judge, civil court, some kind. But with arbitration, it becomes just whoever they've decided, it's a lawyer that knows all of their lines and everything. And so there are governing bodies. I believe there's the one is in Denver for the federal courts. We heard about that earlier this week. But if you're a whistleblower in the federal government, you can go, hey, I have all of this stuff. You send them a letter and you say, I've got all of this information. I'm putting it out there. And then they'll go through it. And yes, it's a government agency, but they've been known to actually rule in the favor of many of these whistleblowers.
Right.
So if there's crimes and there's merit to the evidence that you have, screw that NDA. Screw all of the contracts you've signed. If the other party that you've signed a contract with is in violation of either the contract itself or is in violation of law and it's provable, and then get a lawyer and make sure you do it right.
Exactly. So this is important because we have to talk about, this is exactly the reason why it was created. So you had a Civil Reform Act of 1978, where the federal government recognized the need for full civil service reform and address of inefficiencies and corruption. And the act included some protections of whistleblowers, but then were considered inadequate and failed to prevent retaliation effectively. So let's talk about some of the notable whistleblower cases and their impact. So we're going to start with the 1970s, 1980s high-profile whistleblower cases. So we got Ernie Fitzgerald, 1968, an Air Force cost analysis who exposed a $2 billion cost overrun on the C-5A aircraft project. He faced significant retaliation, including job demotion and harassment. Then, of course, in his court case with Ernest Fitzgerald versus the United States, this case highlighted the need for robust legal protections for whistleblowers and brought national attention to the issue. I mean, 1968, that was a very rough year for the United States.
Oh, well, and to give you context, what the C-5A is, it's the Galaxy. Mm-hmm. It's one of the largest military transport aircraft we've ever built. It's massive. This thing is insane. It's a cool piece of equipment. It can move a lot of hardware. You can put other planes inside of this plane. It's so big. And it's cool. It works, and we use them. But yeah, that project was way over scope and over budget, and they tried to bury it. And it was like, taxpayer money, bro. I don't care how cool your stuff is. You have to have transparency. I mean, that's
well, on top of that, $2 billion back then, now probably at least 50, 60 billion dollars at least. I think you're looking it up, so I'm going to continue while you look it up. The Pentagon Papers, 1971. Daniel Ellsberg, former military analyst who leaked the Pentagon Papers revealing government deception in the Vietnam War. This was very important. His case underscored the personal and professional risks faced by whistleblowers and the necessity of legal safeguards. And I'll say one thing to this. When it comes to like wars like Vietnam, back then, I'm pretty sure there were probably some special interest groups, not as many as there are now, where you have like military contracts and stuff like that, where it's pushing the hand to get those things out into the field to be tested and used. But back then, I mean, I'm not as familiar with the Vietnam War as I am with the modern wars that we've had today, but it was clear that this was a nothing burger, and a lot of people died for no reason. And this is why it's important for information when information like this comes out, that the American people get a chance to hear it and respond to it, because we're the ones paying for this.
Yeah, Vietnam War was rife with deceptions and things. I mean, there were always talks about, we weren't allowed to go into countries like Cambodia, but everybody knew we were in Cambodia. We were over there fighting commies, but were we really fighting commies, or were we just sucking taxpayer money off, right? Just to further some political BS, right? That's what that's about. I can't remember the operation right off the top of my head that the Pentagon Papers revealed, but yeah, they basically false flagged us into that war.
I wonder how many NGOs they had over there.
Bro, don't even get me started. I will go down a rabbit hole right now. Let's stop.
Oh, wait a minute. I gotta find it. There it is. Oh.
No, stop. I'm putting the brakes on that one.
Don't do it. All right, let's move on. Karen Slickwood case, 1974. Karen Slickwood, a chemical technician and union activist who raised safety concerns about the Kerr-McGee plutonium plant. Her mysterious death and the subsequent investigation brought public attention to the dangers faced by whistleblowers. Do you know much about this?
This one's kind of new to me. But in manufacturing, there's a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues with, and this is why we have OSHA. You ever wonder? I worked in a films plant at one point, and when there's plastics and things, and there's big rolls and machines, and there's lots of friction goes over rollers and stuff. These machines all have to be grounded. So that way they can pull excess voltage off of the out of the circuit, or off of everything. Like, you're ever in your car and you go touch the door handle or something, there's a little screw down in there and you get shocked by it. There's when your car's going down the road, it builds up an electrical charge, static charge. Or if you're you got a balloon on your head, you can make your hair stand up, that kind of thing. In industrial settings, the static electricity can build up so much that when it shocks you and it hits you, it can stop your heart. I actually had this happen to me, not the heart stop part, but the shock from going to touch and pull these off of a machine. And I ended up having to walk off a line. And I never walk off a line. And then later I came back and, because now there's issues with, the managers and all the things, and like, blah, 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 and people are mad and whatever. And it's like, no, I told you guys 4 or 5 times. And I came back to him. I said, look, I looked this up. OSHA has record of a lady in Kentucky who died from this very thing. Okay, so like in chemical technician who's like, hey, safety stuff, we need these things, something's going on. This is why OSHA breathes down your neck, because you don't listen to your employees who are on the line doing things. You need to take care of your employees and do right by them. Otherwise, you're going to have federal agencies breathing down your neck. Exactly. That's what happens.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of blue collar workers that watch the show, so they understand this. Yep. All of them do. Truck drivers to factory workers, things like that. This is really important because a lot of companies, of course, their number one goal is their bottom line and trying to cut costs and corners in different areas.
They don't want to shut down that line that feeds Home Depot or Lowe's, that industrial film for construction sites, They don't want to do it. They have so many people on staff, they're running razor thin margins because all the management wants to get their bonuses. And it's like, screw your bonus. I'm the one down here who's having his heart skip a beat because you guys don't think that I'm just being, a wimp or a wuss or whatever. You come over here and put your hands on that machine. And they ended up apologizing to me because they did figure it out. But like, what are you gonna do? Squeaky wheel. You're gonna get the grease one way or the other. Either you're gonna get a little grease on your palm, or they're gonna send you to the door. And I'd rather go to the door with my life than sit around in some place like. And so, yeah, this mysterious death. Does that not sound like Boeing? Speaking of aircraft and whatnot from earlier, we were talking about C-5 Galaxy, which is Lockheed, but I found a picture of a C-5 Galaxy being refueled mid-flight by a Boeing KC class, and it's like the KC class is like your standard size jet airliner, like a passenger airliner, like a 747. I kid you not, the galaxy is like twice or almost 3 times as long as that. They're huge.
Oh my god,
they're massive.
What in the world?
Pull that up,
bro. Hold on.
Look at this.
Hold on. I gotta show you this shit.
I'm not kidding. We're gonna geek a little bit here on this. The Galaxy is probably one of my favorite aircraft that there is, just because of how big that thing is. Like the whole nose, the nose of it cocks open like a freaking pop bot, like I don't know. It's a hinge.
Bro, look at you.
That's a Chinook. Okay, so that helicopter, that's a helicopter that they're pushing in or pulling out of that. That's a dual rotor helicopter that runs on 2 jet engines. They can fit like a whole line of those inside of that. Look at that thing.
This thing.
That thing is massive. Where is that? Does it say what's on the building behind it?
Terminal d'aviation. It looks like French.
Okay, yeah, it might be French. But like I've seen those down in Dayton. There's an Air Force museum. They're pretty cool. You should, if you have an airfield or a museum or someplace that has one of these, go do it. It's cool.
Dude, where do you like how much runway do you need?
A lot
to get this thing off the ground.
A lot. I live next to one of the few airfields in this part of the country that can land and take off. One of those. They're amazing. And I'm in the actual the approach path for it, which makes it awesome. We're getting way off scope of this show tonight.
Yeah, I know, right?
But if you ever wonder why they were over budget, is because they were making a plane that big.
Right on. All right, so let's move on to the legislative efforts and advocacy. Senator William Proxmire and Congressman John Moss advocated for stronger whistleblower protections and introduced various bills in the 70s and 80s. Their efforts laid the groundwork for the WPA. Then you have a Government Accountability Office, the GAO, reports and studies highlighted widespread retaliation against federal employees who reported misconduct. These reports emphasize the inadequacy of existing protections and the need for legislative action. Then, of course, the increased media coverage, every time something like this pops up. In the 1980 hearings, Congress held several hearings where the whistleblowers testified about their experiences in retaliation and the lack of the effective protections. These hearings provided compelling evidence of the need for reform. So in the legislative process in 1987, Representative Frank Horton and Senator Carl Levin introduced a Whistleblower Protection Act to address the shortcomings of previous legislation. In 1989, the extensive debate and revisions, the WPA was passed by Congress and signed into law by President George H.W. Bush on April 10th of 1989.
What was the oversight committees that Reagan put into order? I wonder if some of these have to do with that, because he was president during the 80s, and he had oversight and accountability committees that came in, but there was one specific one that dealt with church committee. It's the church committee.
Yep. Of course it's the church committee. Duh.
Well, the church committee dealt more with like CIA, NSA, IRS, like the big alphabet soup things where they had like secret projects and things going on. And there's a lot of stuff. If you look into the church committee, you'll get down some rabbit holes. We'll just put it that. So when you're talking about the 80s and whistleblowers and people trying to open a can of worms, you're talking about like a can of tentacles that wants to pull you in. It's nasty. It's nasty stuff.
Exactly.
I'm still learning things. Like I got buddies that are all into that. It's like I was like, well, what is that? It gets dark.
You're right. Well, let's move on to our last section. Oh boy, here we go. High-profile whistleblower cases.
Yes.
You already know where I'm going to start with this one.
This week. This is where we start talking about what's happening. I'll
let you
this
take
week.
over here. This will be your scrap rant. There you go.
So we were talking about Julian Assange this week, right? He got a plea deal and he was allowed to go home. Thankfully, I do not like. It pains me to know that this guy was trapped in all the ways possible by our government that targeted him. He's not even a U.S. citizen, like, and he's a journalist also. But we should have afforded him things. But we're gonna get into that here. So he was an Australian journalist, computer programmer, and an activist, best known as the founder and editor-in-chief of Wikileaks, a nonprofit organization that publishes classified, censored, or otherwise restricted information of public interest. Assange's work with Wikileaks has made him a highly controversial figure, celebrated by some as a champion of transparency and freedom of information, and criticized by others for allegedly compromising national security and endangering lives. He was arrested on April 11, 2019 by British authorities. Assange had been living in the Ecuadorian embassy in London since June of 2012, where he sought asylum to avoid extradition to Sweden over allegations of sexual misconduct. Me too. And I'm not saying I was I'm saying hashtag me too. I should have prefaced with a hashtag on that one.
Are you sure, bro? You want to talk about it?
I mean, I might harass my wife when we're done with this show in a little bit, but she might actually be. That's another story. Anyway, we'll keep that one on the off the record. Over time, the tensions grew between Assange and Ecuadorian government, culminating in Ecuador's decision to withdraw his asylum status. British police were invited to the embassy to arrest him, and effectively ending his nearly 7-year refuge there. The initial indictment by the DOJ included one count of conspiracy to commit computer intrusion, focusing on Assange's alleged collaboration with Chelsea Manning. Who's Chelsea Manning? Wasn't that the guy that was in the military? He was a Marine and then transed, and then they let him out because he was trans. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Anyway, I just want to put a little context on that guy. This charge carries a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison. The May 2019, the computer intrusion one, not the guy transing. In May 2019, the DOJ significantly expanded the case against Assange, adding that 17 additional charges under the Espionage Act. So they tried to hammer him with the Espionage Act over things. It's like he's not even. Anyway, he's not even a U.S. citizen, and he's just a journalist receiving documents, right? These charges pertain to the publication of classified documents obtained from Manning. Each of these charges carries a potential 10-year sentence, escalating the legal stake up to and including 175 years in prison for Assange. So basically, he's this guy, and there's reason to believe he's an activist. He does have some Ecuadorian ties. That's why he was in Ecuador. Ecuador is a hotbed of, Marxist, communist kind of revolutionary stuff. I don't know exactly what those ties are, but, when you're a guy that's receiving information from anywhere you can get it and you're going to publish it, because he's published things that have been damaging to the Republican Party, to the Democrat Party, all of that stuff, right? So this is a guy who's released
to the deep state.
In the deep state.
That's the main thing that we have to before you continue is that it's one thing if you go after one party or another. I mean, those things they can kind of fix, but when you start exposing what the actual agencies are doing, that's where it's like, okay, like there are things in here that other people shouldn't see, not because it puts people like us in danger, it puts them in danger.
Right, which is the big criticism of Snowden, because Snowden was an actual inside agency guy. He was an NSA guy, and so with Snowden you see some of this back and forth interagency stuff. So I can understand the heavier criticism of Snowden, where he just kind of put everything out, and it did cause a lot of damage. With Assange, so now they're targeting him, and so let's put some context behind what he actually exposed. Let's bring Seth Rich up. Seth Rich was a whistleblower, potentially, effectively. Seth Rich was a young guy who worked for the DNC in the campaigns. And he had told family members that he was working to uncover voter fraud issues within the Democratic Party. Interestingly enough, all of the things that Assange was posting on WikiLeaks were emails from the Clintons and Podestas, which became the the seed for all of the Pizzagate claims, right? That's where all this came out. So this is what ties into all the things
episodes on that stuff,
which we've already talked about, and we'll recap. We'll recap some of the QAnon and Pizzagate stuff at a later date too, because that was early and we were getting our tooling together, and it's kind of rough. Anyway, we've talked about that, so this is the full circle to other things we've all talked about. So understand that all of that hatred and all of that all of the things that happened through the major censorship stuff of like 2019 and 20 and through COVID, where people were talking about all of those things with the Podesta emails and all that. That's what this is about. He's the guy who published it. All right.
Yes.
That's why they're after him, because he's the one who's exposing not just those things, but there's all kinds of other back catalog. And I'm going to be the first one right now to say, amongst most of the people I know that are talking about Assange getting this plea deal and being let go, a lot of people are saying that he scrubbed that stuff from WikiLeaks. Not true. There are links that work. The links that exist on the website currently are broken, but there are links that work. And if you want the Clinton emails and the Podesta emails, I'm going to make sure that we get those put in the description down below to prove that that stuff exists. It's still there. You can still go find it. They rehashed their website and how they were cataloging everything, because it was really clunky, and they had to like put things in categories organize it a little better. And there's still some stuff that's kind of broken, and hopefully they'll fix it for archival purposes. But Assange isn't even really a whistleblower. He's a journalist. The whistleblowers are the ones who are sending him documentation because they were too afraid of our own government to actually blow the whistle. That's why Seth Rich in DC got 2 in the back in a mugging when they didn't even take his wallet.
Exactly. All right. So
there you go.
Of course, we know what happened after that. So let's go ahead and... Oh, you got it. Beautiful.
Let's go.
Well, let's get back to our breaking news. This is the Fox News alert. The U.S. government has entered into a plea deal with Wikileaks founder Julian Assange.
Hold on.
Fox News senior national correspondent Kevin Court has more details. Kevin.
Evening, Kaylee. Assange had faced 18 counts from a 2019 indictment for his alleged role in a breach. And that, of course, carried a maximum of up to 175 years in prison. Now, you'll recall Assange was being pursued by U.S. authorities for publishing confidential records supplied by former Army intel analyst Chelsea Manning. That happened back in 2010 and 2011. U.S. officials allege that Assange goaded them into obtaining thousands of pages of unfiltered U.S. diplomatic cables that could potentially endanger confidential sources. The material also apparently included U.S.-Iraq war-related activity reports and information related to Guantanamo Bay detainees. But tonight, Assange has agreed to plead guilty to a felony charge. And as part of a deal with the DOJ, he will avoid imprisonment here in the U.S. Now, under this new deal, DOJ prosecutors will seek a 62-month sentence, which is equal to the amount of time that Assange has already served in London, allowing him to immediately return to his native country, Australia. Now, this deal still has to be approved by a judge, a federal judge, but it would appear tonight that Julian Assange may be on his way home.
Time served. That's justice. I think that's as close as you're going to get to justice for him.
It is, but that still begs the question of why exactly now? Why now do they want to do this? I mean, you got to remember, because they were talking about, who was it? Hillary Clinton was talking about drone striking him for doing this. Like,
well, you know, if he's locked up, he's actually more secure.
Right.
He's in a better position. Not that Epstein was all that secure in lockup, but nonetheless.
We'll do an episode on that at some point.
Right. But I've heard talk that maybe if he's in U.S. custody and Trump becomes president, they don't want Trump to have access to him. You know, if he's home, and he's time served, he may just go into the outback somewhere and just, go raise kangaroo, go start up a kangaroo farm or something. I don't know. He might just drop off the map and say, I'm done, I'm retiring. I'm going to turn this over to somebody else. Trump doesn't get the opportunity to have access, and maybe if there's some kind of pardon thing, he might be able to pardon the guy, but like, what's it gonna do? You think Assange, this guy who he's not loyal to anybody. He's probably just gonna be grateful he went home. And I'll bet you anything there's gonna be a spook waiting to off him somewhere if he decides to do any deals with the next incoming administration. They've already proven their ability to, put the bamboo shoot under his fingernails, metaphorically. That's a real thing that they used to do in Vietnam.
Oh,
So anyway, we'll just put it that way. So that's my thing. That's what I think is most likely. They just wanted him to go away.
Yeah.
They say, time served, go home and never come back.
Yep. And then of course, ending on that, for our last portion for tonight, is a man named Ethan Haim. All right. Now, this person, actually, you know what? Let me just go ahead and kill the music. We're going to go ahead and go over the story here real quick.
I got the music.
There we go.
A Houston doctor is facing serious charges. He was in court today accused of accessing and releasing private patient information from Texas Children's Hospital.
The doctor and his lawyer say he is not guilty and called the federal charges politically motivated. Matt Doherty has the story from the Texas Medical Center tonight. Matt?
The question now is whether the doctor violated HIPAA when he accessed those patients' information. The government says he did. The doctor says he's a whistleblower.
I maintained from day one that I had done nothing wrong.
This is Dr. Ethan Haim, a former resident physician at Texas Children's Hospital. Today, the Department of Justice claims he obtained protected health information for patients that were not under his care and without permission. In a 4-count indictment, the FBI says the doctor obtained personal information, including patient names, treatment codes, and the names of patients' physicians through the TCH electronic system without authorization. Prosecutors say he did this under false pretenses in order to cause malicious harm to the hospital by passing the information along to a media contact. But the doctor tells a different story.
We're going to fight this tooth and nail, stand up for whistleblowers everywhere, because if they can come for me, they're going to come for people like you.
The doctor reportedly accessed information that he claimed showed the hospital was continuing to provide gender transitioning care to minors after the hospital stated the treatments were discontinued in accordance with changes to Texas law.
But in this case here, they've decided to indict a whistleblower. And I think that it's a huge contradiction by the Department of Justice.
But when they were asked about what actually happened today, the doctor's attorney said,
We're not going to get into the facts of this case.
In an online fundraising website that's already raised more than $500,000 for the doctor's legal defense, Haim writes that no laws were violated and, quote, no personally identifiable patient health information was disclosed. If the DOJ says Haim faces up to 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine.
Guys,
so we talked about consent.
We're on top of this. We were on top of this.
When we talked about consent the last time? The week
before, it was first episode of season 2.
Yeah, so we talked about HIPAA laws. So this is a guy who took the time to go in and get information and protect the identities of people. And it's what he's talking. There's no personally identifiable information. That's HIPAA. So he went above and beyond. If you're somebody who wants to do damage, you're not going to go out of your way to protect anything. You're just going to let it slide. Because what would happen is if he's able to... So here's the thing. All of those cases we talked about with HIPAA, where the hospitals and the institutions got nailed with HIPAA violations. Why was the institution nailed with a HIPAA violation? Because somebody who worked for them violated the HIPAA. Okay? He protected not only the people who were the patients.
Mhm.
He protected the institution. He did not want to destroy Texas Children's Hospital. If he did, he would have released personally identifiable information, because not only would he have been liable, but also potentially the institution itself. He wanted the institution fixed. He wanted the things they were doing to stop, not for the institution itself to be destroyed. And so that says a lot. He did the right thing in that.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and go into that site that they posted. This is from the Christian Post. Doctor exposed trans procedure at Texas Children's Hospitals faces 10 years in prison. His legal defense fund has raised more than $660,000. Crazy.
There you
go. Yeah. The U.S. Department of Justice unsealed a 4-count indictment against a doctor who potentially faces 10 years in prison after blowing the whistle on the largest pediatric hospital in the U.S. for allegedly prescribing puberty blockers to minors despite claiming otherwise. Dr. Ethan Haim, 34, which, by the way, at 34 years old as a doctor, I mean, he must have just got done residency, all that other stuff. So this is where you're just starting. All right. He completed a surgical residency at Texas Children's Hospital, TCH in Houston, was slapped with 4 felony counts earlier this month after he obtained personal information, including patient names, treatment codes, and the attending physicians of Texas Children's Hospital electronic system without authorization. Haim reportedly leaked such records to journalist Christopher Rufo last year because he exposed the gender-affirming services allegedly still being performed on minors at the hospital at the time, even though the hospital was told the public that it had paused such procedures. Yeah, and I think Ken Paxton and Governor Abbott were very strong against this. You know, they were like, I think they had they had executive orders to stop those things from happening.
Yeah. It reminds me of other things where people who are politically driven and ideologically driven in the medical field, it worries me, because that's why they continue doing this. They thought that this was the right, they thought this was the right thing to do because for whatever reason they did. And it reminds me of the issue we had between Ohio and Indiana with there was an illegal immigrant that was here, and he had relations with an underage girl, and she became pregnant, and then people ran her across the border into Indiana for the abortion. It was a big scandal, all these things. And the left media wanted to run it with this whole thing about, Ohio's got these archaic laws and there's no exceptions and blah, blah, blah. And our own attorney general came out and was like, dude, she's like 11 and pregnant. There's no way we're not going to give her an exception, because we have heartbeat bills, right? In Ohio, we have a lot of protections, although we probably don't have a whole lot of protections anymore after the last thing that went through in our Constitution, where now it's pretty much wide open on all that, unfortunately.
The weed's
but
legal.
Nonetheless, that happened too. I don't know if that's a good thing or not either. I mean, I know people that were about it in other states that now it's wide open, and now they don't like the fact that it's wide open. But that's we should do a whole other thing on that alone. But the point is, they took this girl across state lines, and they, in complete disregard of the laws that already existed, in order to make it political, right? And the doctors are the ones who are in violation of their of what they were doing in Indiana, because they're supposed to report. If you're a doctor, okay, mandatory reporters. We were talking about elderly abuse with Biden earlier. This is another case. If you find out that there is somebody that you believe is in a state, in an environment of abuse, an 11-year-old that's pregnant, you're supposed to report this stuff. Well, they went into Indiana, and the doctors never reported it. They just did the abortion and then sent them on their way. And then they turned it into a media fiasco. The guy, the illegal immigrant, ended up getting arrested and all the things. And investigative reporters went and knocked on the door and talked to people and all the things. Like, it got handled like Ohio went full based on it and said, no, we know how to handle this kind of situation. But the fact of the matter is, just like this Texas Children's Hospital, there were doctors there doing things that obviously they weren't putting in paperwork to. How can you, if you're, now there's a paper trail because it's illegal. There's a doctor over there in Indiana who was so ideologically driven and decided, I'm just going to do this abortion without reporting anything, knowing that this little girl is going to have to go back and be abused again. These people exist in our medical system, and we need to root them out. They need to go away. And I'm glad that this Ethan Haim did this. I'm grateful for whistleblowers like that.
Right. So to close this out with final thoughts, the Whistleblower Protection Act, is this needed, and has this protected, whistleblowers, throughout its inception?
It depends on the varying levels of who you're blowing the whistle on.
Mm-hmm.
Who has the power? How much power do they have? What narratives are trying to be protected? Does this whistleblower feel like they can actually blow the whistle without being taken care of?
Right. Which brings me into Julian Assange, because he's not an American citizen. So but
didn't
does
stop
that
Obama from bombing, Al Qaeda, got a terrorist whose son was an American citizen, Obama, as they called him. It didn't stop him from killing American citizens or even foreigners in other countries and all of that, for other reasons. Like I was saying, it's depends on who you blowing the whistle on, how much power do they have.
And you see this on X all the time, especially with what's going on in Ukraine and Russia with the drone attacks and stuff. This is, you see that and you're outraged by it, but yet when our own government does it, we sit around and say nothing. Our government is not innocent in any of this whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, that also is a whole other discussion of what tools are you willing to use in war to win, and what wars are just wars. That's a whole other philosophy of things, right? So we have, if it's our country, we want our guys to win, right? Home team advantage. That's what we will always root for the home team generally. Most people will that are just fly by night. They don't understand, the politics. When politics is different, and when there's wars going on, you gotta figure out, okay, I'm not just sending a baseball team from Cleveland to New York, to go face our rivals and they come back with a trophy, right? Or or the pennant, or so, however is all those things work, whatever sport it is. These are countries that we now have to do international business with in many respects. Do you want to go over there and tick them off? Do you want to go over, and now we don't, that rolls into all kinds of things like Saudi Arabia and the petrodollar. That doesn't exist anymore. Wait, how many people do you have to piss off before you realize that you're going to have to pay the price one way or another, whether it's bombs and bullets on your own soil, on our soil, or do they just, pull the economic rug out from underneath of us in other ways, which is more likely,
Yeah. So yeah, and that's why these bills are in place.